On a quiet Tuesday morning in suburban Connecticut, Renata Marsh sat at her kitchen table drinking coffee. Her 2 children were at school. Her husband, Callahan, had left for work an hour earlier, the same routine they had shared for nearly 2 decades. The morning light came through the window the way it always did. The house was warm. The coffee was hot. Everything in Renata's world felt exactly the way it was supposed to feel. And then she opened a folder on Callahan's laptop, one he had forgotten to close. And in the span of 60 seconds, her entire world collapsed. Because 4.2 miles away, on that exact same Tuesday morning, another woman named Diane Marsh was doing the exact same thing. Drinking coffee, watching her 3 children get ready for school, waiting for the same man to come home. For 20 years, she and Callahan Marsh had been living 2 complete lives. 2 wives, 2 houses, 2 sets of children, in the same town, and neither woman had any idea. The question is not how he kept this secret for 20 years. The question is how 2 women, living miles apart, both married to the same man, never once suspected a thing. Before we go any further, I want you to do something for me right now. I want you to think about the person you trust the most in your life. Maybe it is your husband. Maybe it is your partner. Maybe it is someone you have shared a home with for years. Now imagine that everything you believed about that person, everything, was built on a lie. Not a small one. Not the kind of lie you could forgive and move past, but a lie so massive, so carefully constructed, so perfectly maintained over 2 decades, that not a single person in your life ever saw it coming. That is exactly what happened to Renata Marsh. And that is exactly what happened to Diane Marsh. And before this video is over, you are going to understand how one man fooled 2 women, 5 children, and an entire community for 20 years without anyone ever asking a single question. And I promise you, the way this story ends is not what you expect. Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And do not forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Now, let us start from the very beginning. Renata Marsh was not the kind of woman who asked too many questions. That was not because she was weak or unintelligent. It was because she genuinely believed that the people she loved would never have a reason to lie to her. She grew up in a small town in upstate New York, the kind of place where everyone knew your name and your family and the general shape of your life. Her father worked at the same factory for 31 years. Her mother raised 4 children in a house with a yellow door and a garden that bloomed every spring without fail. Renata learned early that life was about showing up, being steady, and trusting the people who stood beside you. She carried that belief with her into adulthood, and it became the foundation on which she built everything. She was the kind of woman who remembered birthdays without being reminded, who brought casseroles to neighbors when someone was sick, who believed, down to her bones, that if a man stood in front of you and promised you his life, he meant every single word. And when she met Callahan Marsh at 26 years old, at a dinner party hosted by a mutual friend in Hartford, she believed him completely. He was not flashy. He was not loud. He did not fill a room the way some men do, demanding attention before he had even opened his mouth. Callahan was quieter than that. He was the kind of man who listened, who remembered the small details, the things you mentioned once, and then forgot you had said. He remembered that Renata's favorite flower was the dahlia. He remembered that she had wanted to be a teacher before life took her in a different direction. He remembered the name of the dog she had lost when she was 12 years old, And Renata thought to herself, this man sees me. This man actually sees who I am. They married within 2 years, moved into a modest colonial in Westport, Connecticut, a house with white shutters and a front porch that caught the afternoon light just right. Within 5 years, they had 2 children, a daughter named Sage and a son named Elliot. And by every measure that mattered to Renata, her life was exactly what she had always wanted. A husband who came home, a house that felt safe, children who laughed easily and loved their father without question. Renata did not know it yet, but 4 miles away, another woman was building the exact same life with the exact same man. Diane Marsh was different from Renata in almost every way that mattered. Where Renata was quiet and trusting, Diane was sharper, more observant. She had grown up in Greenwich, Connecticut, tucked in a family that had seen enough of the world to know that things were rarely as simple as they appeared on the surface. Her mother had been married twice before settling into a third marriage that finally held. Diane had watched her mother navigate betrayal and rebuild, and somewhere along the way, she had absorbed a quiet wariness about the world, a small, instinctive voice in the back of her mind that whispered, "Pay attention." And yet, when Diane met Callahan Marsh, that voice went silent. She met him at a community fundraiser in Greenwich, in the spring of a year when the cherry blossoms were particularly thick and the evenings stayed warm well past 8 o'clock. He came alone. He smiled the way he always smiled. Not too wide, not too eager, just enough to make you feel like you were the only person in the room worth talking to. Diane was 31. She had been on enough dates to know the difference between a man who was performing and a man who was genuinely present. Callahan felt like the second kind. He asked her about her work. She was a freelance graphic designer, building a small but steady client base. And he listened to her answer with the kind of focus that most people reserve for conversations they actually care about. By the end of the evening, he had her phone number. By the end of the week, he had called. They began seeing each other regularly. And within a year, Diane was pregnant. They married quietly. A small ceremony, just close friends. No large reception. No announcements in the local paper. Diane did not think much of it at the time. Callahan explained that he was a private person, that he preferred to keep his personal life separate from his professional one, and Diane respected that. Over the next 4 years, they had 3 children. A son named Troy, a daughter named Amelia, and a younger son named Lucas. Diane built a home for them on a quiet street, and she raised those children the way she had been raised. With structure, with warmth, and with the deep, unshakable belief that the man she had chosen was hers alone. She had no reason to think otherwise. Callahan was there. He was attentive. He came home when he said he would. He held his children at night and read to them before bed and told Diane again and again that she was the only woman he had ever truly loved. And Diane believed him. Because for 20 years, there was nothing in her life that told her any differently. Here is what makes Callahan Marsh different from the men in the stories you have heard before. He was not reckless. He was not sloppy. He did not make the kinds of mistakes that most people assume a man in his position would eventually make. Callahan Marsh did not maintain 2 families out of carelessness. He maintained them out of extraordinary, calculated discipline. He had 2 separate phone numbers, 2 separate email accounts, 2 separate sets of financial records. He managed 2 households, 2 sets of children's school schedules, 2 different social circles, and 2 women who each believed they were the center of his world. And he did all of it without a single person, in either life, ever connecting the 2. He told Renata he worked in real estate development. He told Diane the same thing. And he did. He was successful enough that his absences were always explicable. A deal in another county. A meeting that ran long. A project that required him to be away for a few days. The excuses were never dramatic. They were never the kind of thing that would make a wife look twice. They were ordinary, mundane, the kind of explanations that a busy, hard-working man offers every single day in homes all across this country, and no one thinks twice. That was Callahan's genius. He never gave either woman a reason to look closer. He gave them just enough truth to make the lie feel completely real. Every deception of this scale leaves marks. Small ones. The kind of marks that, on their own, mean nothing at all. But when you line them up, when you place them side by side, one after another, and look at the pattern they create, they tell a story that is impossible to ignore. Renata saw the marks first. Or rather, she saw them and chose not to look at them closely. There were nights when Callahan did not come home. Not often. Maybe once every 2 weeks. Sometimes less. He would call from the road, his voice warm and apologetic, and explain that a meeting had run late or that traffic had made it impossible to get back in time. Renata never challenged him. She had no reason to. The explanations made sense. They fit the life she understood him to be living. And so she accepted them. The way you accept the small imperfections in any long marriage, without ever stopping to ask whether those imperfections were actually something else entirely. There was the receipt. Renata found it once, tucked into the pocket of a jacket Callahan had left draped over a chair. It was from a restaurant she had never been to, on a night when Callahan had told her he was homesick and had spent the entire evening on the couch watching television. She picked up the receipt. She looked at it. She looked at the date. And then she asked him about it, casually, the next morning over breakfast. Callahan glanced at it, smiled slightly, and said it was from a client dinner he had forgotten to mention. Renata put the receipt down. She did not ask again. She did not keep it. She did not think about it again for years. And Diane, who had grown up watching her mother survive betrayal, who had that small, instinctive voice in the back of her mind. Diane saw the marks too. The absences. The evenings when Callahan seemed distracted, as though part of his attention was somewhere else entirely. There was one night when Diane came home early from a client meeting and found Callahan in the backyard, on the phone, speaking in a voice she had never heard him use before, low, almost tender, but directed at someone who was clearly not her. When she walked outside, he ended the call immediately. He told her it was a business associate, a difficult negotiation. Diane looked at him for a long moment, and then she let it go, because Callahan had never given her a reason not to trust him. And trust, once it is built over years, does not disappear because of a single moment that does not quite fit. The children of both families attended schools in the same county, Sage Marsh and Troy. Marsh, half-siblings who shared a father's blood and a family name, may have passed each other in a grocery store. They may have sat in the same waiting room at a pediatrician's office. They may have been in the same room at a school event, without either one of them knowing that the other existed. For 19 years, 5 children grew up believing they were the only children of Callahan Marsh, and not one of them ever suspected otherwise. It started with a tax document. That is all it was. A piece of paper, filed away in a cabinet in the home office, that Callahan had either forgotten about or assumed no one would ever think to open. Sage Marsh was 19 years old when she found it. She was home from college for a weekend visit, one of those ordinary, unremarkable trips home that young people make without thinking much about it. Her mother, Renata, asked her to help sort through a stack of paperwork in the office. It was not unusual. Sage had done this before. She was organized by nature, the kind of daughter who helped without being asked, who found a quiet satisfaction in putting things in order. She opened a filing cabinet. She pulled out a folder from the back, one she had never seen before. And inside that folder was a property deed for a house, in the same town where she had grown up, under her father's name, but with a different address, and listed alongside Callahan Marsh's name was the name of another woman, Diane Marsh. Sage did not call her mother. She did not call her father. She did not scream or cry or slam the folder shut and pretend she had never seen it. She sat down. She pulled every document out of that folder, one by one, and she read them. All of them. Property records, insurance documents, a second set of financial statements that showed a household Sage had never known existed. She sat in that room for 40 minutes, reading in silence, and by the time she stood up, she understood exactly what Callahan Marsh had been doing for 2 decades. Her hands were steady, her face was calm. But inside, something had broken that would take years to fully understand. What Sage discovered from a filing cabinet, Troy Marsh discovered from a screen. Troy was 17 years old, sharp, curious, the kind of teenager who spent hours online not because he had nothing better to do, but because the internet fascinated him. He was working on a school assignment about property values in their county. It was supposed to be straightforward research. Look up addresses, compare prices, write a report. But Troy, because he was Troy, went further than the assignment required. He typed his father's name into a public property records database, not because he suspected anything. He typed it in the way any teenager might, out of curiosity, out of the idle impulse to see what would come up. 2 addresses appeared, 2 properties, both owned by Callahan Marsh. Troy assumed at first that the second one was an investment property, a rental maybe, something his father had bought as part of his real estate work and simply never mentioned. But then Troy looked at the second address on a map, and it was not a commercial listing. It was a house, a residential home in a quiet neighborhood, with a yard and a driveway and the kind of mailbox that belongs to a family that lives there every single day. Troy did not call his father. He did not tell his mother. He got into his car that same evening and drove to the address. He parked across the street, and he sat there, in the dark, watching. And after a few minutes, a light came on inside the house, and in the doorway, silhouetted against the warm glow of the interior, stood Callahan Marsh. Neither Sage nor Troy knew about the other at this point. They were each carrying the weight of what they had found completely alone. 2 teenagers in 2 different houses, both staring at the same impossible truth, and neither one of them had anyone to talk to about it. Sage could not tell Renata. Not yet. Not until she understood the full scope of what she was looking at. And Troy could not tell Diane. Not until he had seen it with his own eyes, which he had, and still could not fully believe. But Sage did something that would change everything. She searched the name on the property deed, Diane Marsh, on social media, and she found her. Same last name, same city. A profile with photographs of children and a life that looked, from the outside, exactly like the life Sage had grown up in. Sage scrolled through the photographs. She looked at the children's faces, and then she noticed a boy, about her age, maybe a year or 2 younger. A boy with the same jaw as her father, the same eyes. She clicked on his profile. His name was Troy Marsh. Sage sent him a message, not from her own account, from a different one, anonymous, careful, giving nothing away. She asked him a single question. She asked him what his father did for a living. Troy replied within minutes. He said his father was in real estate, and from that single answer, the conversation that followed lasted 2 hours. Two teenagers messaging back and forth late into the night, carefully, cautiously, each one testing whether the other already knew what they knew. And by 1 o'clock in the morning, they did. They had mapped out the entire architecture of Callahan Marsh's double life. The 2 addresses, the 2 families, the 20 years of parallel existence. And then they made a decision. They would not tell their mothers first. They would confront Callahan together. But Callahan was not home that night. He was not at either house. When Sage and Troy had quietly coordinated, agreeing to show up at Callahan's door at the same time, from 2 different directions, and force him to face what he had done, they did not account for the possibility that he would simply not be there. Sage arrived at Renata's house first. She walked through the front door, and her mother was sitting in the living room reading a book. Renata looked up and smiled, and Sage stood in the doorway for a long moment, looking at her mother, this woman who had spent 20 years building a life she believed was real, and she felt something crack open inside her chest. She sat down across from Renata, and she told her everything. She told her about the folder, about the property deed, about the name Diane Marsh, about the second house, the second family, the second set of children. She told her all of it in a calm and steady voice, because if she had let her voice shake, she would not have been able to finish. Renata did not interrupt. She did not cry. She did not stand up or pace the room or demand to know if Sage was telling the truth. She sat very still. And then she asked a single question. She asked, "How long?" And Sage said, 20 years. And Renata nodded, just once. As if some part of her, some buried, quiet part that she had spent 2 decades refusing to listen to, had always known. Diane learned the truth from Troy, and her reaction was nothing like Renata's. Where Renata went still and quiet, absorbing the shock the way a body absorbs a blow without immediate movement, Diane went to work. Troy told her everything he had found, the property records, the second address, the photographs of another family. And Diane did not sit down. She did not stare into space. She stood up, she walked to her desk, opened her laptop, and began pulling up every record she could find. Every text message Callahan had ever sent her, every voicemail she had saved, every calendar entry, every receipt, every photograph. She began laying them out, digitally, methodically, and she started to reconstruct the timeline. She went back years. She marked every night Callahan had not come home, every holiday he had missed, every excuse he had given. And as the list grew longer, as the pattern became undeniable, Diane felt something settle over her. Not grief, not yet, but a cold and precise understanding of exactly how much of her life had been carefully, deliberately shaped by someone else's hands. She had been so proud of the life she had built, and now she could see, with brutal clarity, that she had not built it at all. Callahan had built it. He had constructed it around her the way a set designer constructs a room for a film, making it look real, making it feel real, while knowing the entire time that none of it was. Renata and Diane met 3 days after the truth came out. Not by accident. Sage had reached out to Troy again, this time openly, using her real name, and the 2 of them had told their mothers about each other. The decision to meet was made quietly, without drama, Renata suggested a diner, neutral ground, halfway between the two houses. They sat across from each other at a corner booth, and for the first few minutes, neither woman spoke. They looked at each other the way you look at a stranger who is somehow also the closest person in the world to you. Someone who shares something so enormous, so intimate, so devastating, that no introduction could possibly be adequate. Renata spoke first. She asked Diane how long she had known Callahan. Diane said 20 years. Renata nodded. She said, "Me too." And then they began to talk. They talked for 2 hours. They compared every detail, every story Callahan had told them about his childhood, his past, his family. And they discovered that he had told them entirely different versions of his own life. Different cities where he grew up, different stories about his parents, different histories, fabricated from scratch, tailored to each woman separately. He had never let the two lives touch, not once. In 20 years, he had never made a single mistake that would have allowed either woman to see the other. And as Renata and Diane sat in that diner, comparing notes, a strange thing happened. They did not hate each other, just they did not blame each other. They looked across the table and saw not a rival, but a mirror. Two women who had loved the same man. Two women who had trusted him completely. Two women who had been fooled in exactly the same way, for exactly the same amount of time, by someone who had looked them both in the eye and lied without flinching. Both marriages were legally complicated. Only one could be valid. Renata's, having taken place first, was recognized as the lawful marriage under Connecticut law. Diane's was declared void. But the legal fight was never really about the marriages themselves. It was about the children. Callahan had fathered 5 children across 2 households. 2 with Renata, 3 with Diane. Custody arrangements had to be created from nothing. Financial records had to be untangled. Its assets that had been split across 2 separate lives had to be identified, accounted for, and divided. And Callahan, for the first time in 20 years, had no version of himself left to hide behind. There was no alias, no alternate story, no carefully maintained separation between the man he was on one side of town and the man he was on the other. He was just one person now. One person sitting in a courtroom, facing the full weight of what he had done, with no script left to follow. Renata and Diane did not go to war with each other. They went to war together. They hired the same lawyer. They stood side by side in court. And they made sure that every financial account Callahan had hidden, every asset, every property, every dollar he had used to sustain 2 parallel lives, was laid bare for the court to see. When Callahan was confronted, first by Sage and Troy, then by both wives at the same time, he did not deny anything. He did not argue. He did not construct another story or try to reframe what he had done into something more palatable. He simply said that he had loved both women, that he had never wanted to hurt anyone, that the 2 lives had become so separate in his own mind that they felt, to him, like 2 completely different realities running at the same time. Neither woman accepted this, but both noted something that unsettled them far more than anger would have. Callahan did not appear to feel guilt. He appeared to feel confusion, as though he genuinely could not understand why what he had done was wrong. As though, in his mind, the architecture he had built, 2 homes, 2 families, 2 women who each believed they were his only wife, was not a betrayal at all. It was simply the way his life was organized. Psychologists who study men who lead double lives describe a phenomenon called compartmentalization. the ability to separate different parts of your life into isolated mental boxes so that the reality of one box does not bleed into another. For most people, this is a mild and ordinary defense mechanism. We all do it to some degree. We keep our work life separate from our home life. We present different versions of ourselves in different contexts. But in extreme cases like Callahan Marsh, compartmentalization becomes something else entirely. It becomes a way of dismantling the very concept of accountability. If the two lives never touch, if they never overlap, then from inside his own mind, there is no single moment where the lie is visible. There is no point at which Callahan has to look at both women at the same time and see what he has done to each of them. Each life on its own feels completely true. The hardest part was not the divorce. It was not the courtroom. It was not the financial fallout or the media attention or the way the story spread through the community like fire through dry grass. The hardest part was the children. Sage and Troy had been the ones to uncover the truth. They had been the ones to piece it together, to carry it alone, to decide when and how to tell their mothers. And that weight, the weight of being the ones who broke the news, settled on them in ways that took months to fully understand. Sage later described the feeling as having to go back and re-examine every single memory of her childhood, every birthday party, every vacation. Every night her father had tucked her in and told her she was the most important person in his world. She had to look at all of those moments and ask herself, was any of it real? Was he present when he was with me? Or was part of his mind always somewhere else, in another house with another family? Troy handled it differently. He went quiet. He stopped returning Callahan's calls. He did not yell or confront or demand explanations. He simply withdrew. He closed the door on his father in a way that was quieter than anger, but far more permanent. And the younger children, Elliot, Amelia, and Lucas, took the longest to understand. They were too young to have been part of the discovery, and they learned the truth secondhand, from their mothers, in conversations that had to be carefully managed to protect them from the full weight of what had happened. But eventually, weeks later, then months later, all five of them met. In a room together, for the first time in their lives, they sat with the knowledge that they were half-siblings, that they shared a father, that none of them had known about the others. There was no dramatic reunion, no tears or embraces or declarations. They simply sat together, quietly, and looked at each other. Five children who had grown up in the same town, in the same county, breathing the same air, and none of them had ever known the other existed. 6 months after the truth came out, Callahan Marsh began seeing a therapist. This was not voluntary at first. It was part of the terms set by the court during the custody proceedings, a requirement that he demonstrate through professional evaluation that he understood the harm his actions had caused and was willing to address it. But what the therapist found was not what anyone expected. After weeks of evaluation, Callahan was identified as having a profound and long-standing difficulty distinguishing between deception and compartmentalization. In other words, and this is the part that will stay with you long after this video is over, Callahan Marsh did not experience what he did as lying. To him, the two families were not secrets. They were not hidden lives that he was consciously concealing from the people he loved. They were simply two separate chapters of his existence, running at the same time, each one complete and self-contained. He could love Renata fully, and he did, or believed he did. He could love Diane fully, and he did, or believed he did. And in his mind, Those two realities did not contradict each other, because he never allowed them to exist in the same space. He never had to look at both women at once and see the damage. He never had to hold the full truth in his hands, because his mind had built walls between the compartments that were strong enough to keep the truth from ever becoming visible to him. Renata said later that she did not know whether that made it better or worse, whether it was more forgivable to know that the man who had destroyed her life had done it without understanding what he was doing. Diane said it made it worse, because if Callahan Marsh had never truly understood that what he was doing was wrong, if the architecture of his mind had made it genuinely impossible for him to see the harm, then there was nothing to stop him from doing it again. 20 years, 2 wives, 2 houses, 2 sets of children, 5 kids who grew up believing they were the only ones. 1 man who looked at 2 women every single day and told them both that they were everything to him, and meant it, or believed he meant it, in a way that the rest of us can barely begin to understand. The story of Callahan Marsh is not the story of a monster. Monsters are easy to identify. They are cold. They are cruel. They enjoy the pain they cause. Callahan Marsh was none of those things, at least not in any way that either woman ever saw. He was warm. He was present. He remembered the small details. He held his children at night. He was, by every measure that mattered in the day-to-day rhythm of a family's life, a good man. And that is what makes this story so difficult to process. Because if Callahan Marsh could do this, if a man who appeared, in every way, to be loving and trustworthy and present, could build an entire second life and maintain it for 20 years without a single person noticing, then the question is no longer whether someone like this exists. The question is, how many of us are living next to one right now and simply do not know it? So here is what I want you to think about, and I want you to be honest with yourself and in the comments below. If you found out tomorrow that someone you had trusted for years, someone you had built your life with, had been living a second life the entire time, would you have seen the signs? Or would you have done exactly what Renata and Diane did? Would you have looked at the receipt and the missed nights and the small moments that did not quite add up and let every single one of them go? That is the question this story leaves you with. And if this video stayed with you, and I think it will, hit the subscribe button, like and comment.